Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our weekly creative challenge. I am Anna-Alexia Basile, a San Francisco-based fashion portrait and commercial photographer. I'm so happy to see you all for our third time in April as we dive into some fun Photoshop challenges together. So today we are going to be covering luminous landscapes. And basically what that means is that we're just going to be taking a look at a couple landscape photos and just figuring out ways to really bring them to life on Photoshop, right? Because we all know that even though sometimes when we take a photo and it feels kind of perfect as is in the moment, and we're like, oh, it's such a great photo, I'm ready for it to be out in the world. If we literally just spend 5 minutes or less editing it, we're just going to notice a tremendous difference in the final output. So let's go ahead. And if you are in the chat, I would love to see where you all are calling in from. And let me know where you are, what time zone you're in, if it's beautiful where you are, if it's dreary outside. I'm in San Francisco and it's pretty overcast, but we've still got some nice light. So I'm feeling really good. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So this is the image that we are going to be working with first today. And here, this is a photo that I shot at sort of between Land's End and Sutro Baths in San Francisco, basically just completely along like the most far west you could possibly go in the city. And it's just this really beautiful, magical area where if you're lucky, you might see whales, you can hike. It's really, really special because there are all of these really gorgeous succulent trails, and you're just sort of like weaving up and down these gorgeous cliffs with the beautiful Pacific Ocean right in front of you. And if you end up there at sunset, as I did for these images, you're just like in for a really special treat. So let's go ahead and dive into really bringing this image to life. So here we have a photo that like showcases, some beautiful aspects of our gorgeous California coastline, but we really want to make everything stand out and pop and just feel a little bit more clear on where we're drawing the eye to. So as usual, we're going to use Adobe Camera Raw to do our color corrections. So because this is a raw file, over here, it's automatically going to open up into Adobe Camera Raw. So from here, I'm just going to go move through my basic color corrections. So I might increase the exposure here a little bit, and then I might also, bump up the contrast just a smidge. I like to bring down the highlights typically, just as a rule of thumb, so that I can really see what I'm working with, because if our highlights are super blown out, sometimes we lose information and it's not always highlighting exactly the areas that I want to highlight necessarily. So I tend to bring them down usually and then go back in and make some adjustments later, which we will do here. Then with shadows, I bring them out a little bit. I just like to make sure that I have detail, here in some of these darker areas, but we are again going to correct for that later on. With the whites, similar to the highlights, I tend to bring them down a little bit. Blacks, similar to shadows, bring them up. This does sort of create a flat image initially, right? Like we're essentially decreasing the contrast, but I'm going to go back and add that in manually with curves after the fact. So here for temperature, like if we wanted to like warm this up a little bit, we could, but I actually quite like where it's at right now. I feel like the warmer tones are sort of like an old like hipstematic vibe. And I've just been really feeling these like cooler blue tones lately. So I'm gonna leave my white balance as is. I feel like the color temperature and the tints are looking pretty good. And then when I scroll down here to color mixer, if you've joined me for any of these creative challenges before, you know I am a freak when it comes to color mixer. It's my favorite, favorite, favorite part of editing images, right? And as you all know, hue means what kind of color are we working with? For the blue, is it going to be sort of like this warmer blue to the right? Or if we drag it to the left, is it going to be sort of this cooler greeny blue? Saturation has to do with how much of that color is going to be present in the image. So again, with, our aquas and our blue, we can just really play with this. Do we want like zero of that color, or do we want a ton of it? And then, of course, with luminance, our last of these three just means how light or dark do we want that color to be showing. So do we want the sea to be really, really dark? Do we want it to be really, really bright? So here, I am going to start off with my hue. I actually really like the way that the blue is looking. So I am sort of going to leave it as is. I'm generally feeling pretty solid about my colors, but I am going to just bump up the saturation a little bit here of the aqua. When I play with the blue, it looks a little nice, but I'm going to decrease that a little bit because I don't want it to look super fake. Then I noticed that I have these like gorgeous succulent plants in here that you can't quite see very well yet. So we are going to increase the luminance on the greens here just to really like bring out that part of the image a little bit. And then we're also going to increase the saturation of the greens here to just help that pop. Now, if we are feeling like we want this area to, be a slightly different color green, we can play with that in here. I think the cooler tone makes sense because it's in shadow, but I actually already kind of like where it's at. So maybe cool it down just a smidge, but otherwise, I feel like it's generally looking pretty good. Back to luminance, I'm noticing that this part of the cliff that is in direct sunlight is like reading a little bit bright for my taste. So I am going to bring the oranges down just a smidge here. And then from there, it looks like we are pretty much ready to go. Something that sometimes I mess around with is that I'll go into the shadows if I have a lot of deep shadows in here, and I might just bring them up a little bit. This kind of will give you a little bit of more of like a film effect, which I'm actually going to be talking about next week. Um, but for this, I'm only going to bring it up ever so slightly here. And now it's looking pretty good to me. So we are going to open it into Photoshop. And now what we're going to do is manually add in some, we're going to manually highlight and manually emphasize certain aspects of the image. So because of the color corrections that I typically tend to make, I'm creating a rather flat image, which for me works really well because I go in and add definition after the fact. And when I talk about adding definition, I really mean creating contrast. Now, contrast can be created a bunch of different ways, right? We can create contrast with light and dark. We can create contrast with color. Here, what I'm going to do is go down and add some curves. So here I'm going to increase, and we're just gonna like brighten the image a little bit here. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here, back to curves. I'm gonna create another one. And here I'm just going to decrease it a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert these selections. So you want to make sure that you have this little like white area selected when you do this. And if you are working on a Mac, you're going to do Command I at the same time. That's going to invert and sort of hide your mask. And then if you are on a PC, you're going to do Control I. So here I'm going to select the second one. And there we go. We've inverted and hidden it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually paint these curve layers back into specific parts of the image that I really want to highlight. So why I'm doing this is that I want to sort of guide the eye through the image, right? We want to give you like a general direction to follow, as your eye sort of moves through the image. But then it's also a really great way of selectively, highlighting and creating contrast in specific areas. So when we paint, we want to make sure that we have our brush tool selected, and then we want to make sure that down here, our color obviously is set to white. Once that's done, we can come down here, and if you think that, you might, maybe you're like trying to remember like what something is looking like. If you're like, oh, which one was my lighter one? Which was my darker one? Just do a test shot. So here I have my brush tool. If I want to increase the size, I use the right bracket, decrease, use the left bracket. And here I'm just gonna go in and manually, oops, wrong thing, not a new layer. I'm gonna go in and I'm going to manually paint in these highlights. So here I'm really highlighting this like whitewash along the water that's in these little portions of direct sunlight, adjusting my brush size when needed. But here, again, I'm just sort of going in and being really mindful, really demure about what it is that I am painting in. So here, again, I'm really just wanting to help emphasize all of this like really gorgeous foam. And you can see I'm going in here and I'm not even that zoomed in, right? Like I'm just sort of going for it and making these selections. You don't have to be super, super, super precise if your curves layer wasn't, this insane stark difference. So here I'm just going in, painting these areas. I actually really like to do this a little bit zoomed out, even though it can seem like I'm being a little less precise. I actually feel like it gives me a better sense of the movement that I want to take in my overall image. So here again, I'm just sort of like highlighting these lighter parts. This seems like a long, labor-intensive thing, but it really isn't. You can do this really fast and honestly, as loosely as you want to. Here, I've made the brush bigger and I'm just going in and highlighting these areas. So now that I've gone in and I've worked with the foam within the ocean, I kind of want to brighten this area too. So let's experiment with doing that here. So I'm just going to come in and just bring this in a little bit. So once we have that done, I already like this a lot more because even though this area is in shadow and naturally is going to be a little bit darker, I don't want it to be so dark that it starts to sort of lose its color and definition with what's there. And so I've just lightened it a little bit. Now, if I, also want to maybe lighten some of these rocks ever so slightly because I want the eye to still like flow within the center of the image, I just sort of go in and get those deeper, darker shadows and give them a little bit of like a light lift. All right. So now that we have that done, we're going to go in and work with our darker curves. So here what I'm going to be doing is really highlighting where there would naturally be shadow, even though before I was working with areas of the foam that were in shadow just to sort of make them pop. Here I'm actually being more intentional with where the shadows are. So I am going to go in here sort of like under this wave and highlight that the crest is sort of moving through here. Might get like a little bit smaller in here. And then I'm just going to do the same wherever there's sort of like the shadowy portion of a wave. So I'm sort of going in, painting in here. You can tell where the waves are because there's naturally just a little bit of shadow in that area. So if you feel like, maybe you like went a little too ham and you don't like absolutely love something that you do, just go here and undo it. No sweat. So now, that I've gone in and I've sort of highlighted these shadowy portions, maybe I also want to make this part even darker. That's like in this little piece of direct sunlight, really help it to pop. So now that I have gone in and used curves to sort of emphasize the aspects of the image that I want to highlight and then sort of bring shadows very intentionally back into specific areas, maybe I want to like come add some in over here a little bit more. But now that I've done that, maybe let's just do one more. I love this image because with the sea, you're always like, ah, there's so much more that I can do. Okay, I don't like that last one, so I'm going to take it out. But now that I've gone in and added in these shadows, what I want to do is sort of create a little bit of a vignette to, again, help your eye come more into the center. So again, just keeping that same curves layer, which you don't have to do. You could even create a new one, but I can just sort of draw back in a little bit of a vignette around here. Again, you only want to do it where it would be naturally right. Like there wouldn't be one right here because you can tell that the sun is coming from this direction, and we know that the sun is coming from this direction because we can see that the shadows are moving from left to right. So we're not going to put any vignette over here. Honestly, we don't need it over here too because there's nothing that is casting a big shadow here. So we're only adding it into the bottom of the image. So here, if we look at our before and after, obviously this is after our color corrections, you can see here that it makes a really big difference, right? In the end, by adding these, really intentional curves, we are able to highlight aspects of the image that would otherwise just sort of be a little bit more flat. So let's move on to our second photo here. Now in here, we can actually do something really similar to what we did before, right? We can use our curves to, let's see, let's just bring this up a little bit. And here, what I'm really trying to do is highlight this shadowy portion of the trees. So, oops, let's not get too crazy with it. So let's do that. And then we're going to make another curve that is just a little bit darker. And then same thing, we're going to invert them. Command I if you're on a Mac, Control I if you are on a PC. So let's go in and sort of paint portions of the tree up in here. So here, we're really just bringing out the definition and showing what is actually happening in these trees, because otherwise they look like a super heavy contrast to a degree that I'm like not super comfortable with, dark mess. We want to see what is back here. And even though, it was a really bright and sunny day, we don't have to sacrifice having a little bit more definition in here. So here, I'm just sort of moving really quickly because we only have a limited amount of time. But what I am ultimately going to do is to showcase how you can increase, we want to just like bring in a little bit of brightness into the leaves, but then we can also do that similarly with highlighting some of these tree trunks. So here, we're going in here and just adding in a little bit of dimension, really just sort of like making it pop. And with this, I'm going to get really close in because I want to really see everything. So here, I'm just loosely sort of going over these tree trunks, right? Because they're like this really beautiful grayish color. And we just want to help these elements pop and just set themselves apart from the rest of the image and really stand out. So here, once we have made these adjustments, what we can do is then take our darker curves and go in where we feel like we want to darken a certain area. Maybe you're like, I like kind of went like a little bit too ham right here. I want to just like bring this down a little bit. That's feeling a little crazy and I want to just compensate for it a little bit. You can do that. And then what I have been really enjoying doing with my landscape photos is that I've been letting go of the fact that not everything is perfect in nature, but that doesn't mean that you can't perfect it after the fact using Gen Fill. So we're going to go in here and we're going to use our patch tool, and we're just going to make some loose selections to sort of fill out this bottom area and give it more of this kind of like flowery vibe. So here, I kind of like to work in smaller patches at first and then build my way up. So I'm keeping, as much of like the green areas as possible and the flowers, and I'm just going in and picking the areas that look a little bit more, like drier, less filled in. And I'm just going to play around with filling them in to make the area feel more lush and more full. Again, here we can scroll through our variations. I kind of like this second one, and then I'm just going to keep moving. So here I'm going into this like pretty deep, dark, shadowy portion. We're going to play around. With this image, I actually was photographing two people in this space, and it was so special to be able to make this already really gorgeous area look so much more lush by using generative fill. And, as we know, it's something that takes so little time and has such tremendous impact on the final output. So here, I'm sort of going in and again, just choosing areas that have like more sparse branches, sparse leaves. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just so crazy how good it looks. I really love having the option of the variations because I feel like it just makes me have a little bit more of a semblance of, control with the images. And naturally, as a Virgo, I really love having choice. So here we're going in, and again, we're just focusing on this bottom area here. And I mean, it's crazy to me that already in just, like a couple short minutes, we've already made tremendous changes. And so here I am, kind of looking around. Sometimes what I notice is that there are areas where I've already gone in and used generative fill that I want to generative fill over again, certain pieces of. And so when I'm feeling really happy with the image and I know that I'm not going to go in and need these layers again, what I do is I just go to my layers, I flatten the image, and now I can literally work with all aspects of this area all over again. Because previously, if I had tried to, go over an area that had already been filled, what it would do, because we already filled this area and not here, sometimes it doesn't come out as well as we want it to because there's like a stark line between where we've already filled and the background image that is underneath it. So, here it worked out for us really well, but in general, I will typically go in and flatten the image. So here I'm going to go in and get rid of this little like brown bare area. And then I'm already looking for where I want to go next. I think I might try to get rid of this and then see what we can do with that tree. So, I mean, if I was like a bunny hopping through spring, I would be so stoked to be in here. And we're getting close to the end. So I'm just going to show you just a couple more things. But here we're going to go in, generate, and then we're going to fix this tree and then look at the before and after. So right now, we have completely transformed the bottom section of our image here. I am really liking how many more flowers there are. I like how much more green it feels with this tree. Let's see what we can do. Not that we don't love a good broken tree, but I mean, if we're already going in here and using generative fill for all of this other stuff, we might as well see what is possible. So once we're in here, don't love that. That one is looking all right. I think I'm feeling this the most. Okay, so let's take a step back and look at what we created. So if we go back to the very beginning, we were working with this. And when we go to our final image, we landed here. So again, we have our before and we have our after. So our after is just a really fantastic example of how we can use curves again to really highlight and emphasize specific aspects of our landscape images to really bring them to light and create contrast and be really intentional with where we are creating that contrast. And then we ended up using generative fill to really fill in the area, make it feel more lush, and ultimately create a beautiful and refined final product. So thank you so much for joining me, everyone. It was so great to be here with you all today. Join in at the same time next Tuesday as we cover how to turn digital images into having more of this like fun vintage film vibe. See you next time.